And now from Washington, the Inside Scoop. All the news the government does not want you to hear. Now, here's your host on the Inside Scoop, Mark Levine.
The Inside Scoop, where we proudly give you all the news the government does not want you to know. If you were to study an American textbook or ask an American what the role of the Attorney General is, they might tell you that the Attorney General is the nation's top law enforcement officer. If you were to ask what the role of the Surgeon General is, someone would probably tell you they're in charge of public health. The head of the Department of Education is supposed to be in charge of education. The head of the Department of Homeland Security is supposed to be in charge of the Department of Homeland Security. And if you believe all that, then you really know nothing about Washington or our present government. It seems that the role of the Attorney General is to cover up lawlessness of the administration. The role of the Surgeon General is to help promote the Bush administration's politics, not to promote public health. The list goes on and on and on. And we see with the testimony of Attorney General Alberto Gonzales and the new things that the former Surgeon General Richard Carmona has been talking about, that this is an administration that cares mostly about politics and power far more than, say, protecting the American people. For a perhaps different perspective, perhaps similar perspective, I'm going to be speaking with Melanie Scarborough today. She's a columnist for the Washington Examiner. Melanie, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Glad to be here.
Let's start with Attorney General Alberto Gonzales. He did not make many friends this week.
He did not. He didn't have many to start with.
Well, that's true. In either party, actually.
Right.
I think Republicans are getting tired of him, too.
I think they are.
Now, just this week, we had the Chuck Schumer, Senator of New York, say that he thinks this should be submitted to a special prosecutor for perjury. We also had contempt citations against Harriet Miers, against Josh Bolton, the chief of staff of the White House. In this whole U.S. prosecutor scandal, the administration is working very, very, very hard to hide the evidence from the American people. What do you think they're trying to hide?
I think those are two separate issues. I think the problem with Alberto Gonzales, what he's lying about clearly, is about the NSA program that he, when he went to the acting attorney general, when he said there were no significant disagreements within the administration, when clearly there were. As far as the contempt citations for the president's staff, I think that's a little shakier ground there, just because the Congress has nothing to do with hiring and firing of U.S. attorneys. That is something that's a strictly an executive privilege of White House function. So for the Congress to think they can call these people and demand that they talk about what was said, I happen to agree with Representative Sensenbrenner that the better tactic would have been to attack the claim of executive privilege than to try to, because the contempt citations aren't going to go anywhere. Even if they refer them to the U.S. attorney can't do anything because his boss is President Bush, who's going to tell him not to prosecute.
Well, this is a very interesting thing because there are two ways to hold someone in contempt under the law. One is the inherent power of contempt that Congress has under the Constitution. They can hold someone, they can have a trial right there in the House or the Senate. This hasn't been done since 1934, but it is a right for them to do, and frankly, they may end up going that route. The other route that you talk about, there's a statute that says that the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia is required by law. It shall be his duty when a House of Congress, the Senate or the House, votes to hold someone in contempt. It shall be his duty to bring it to the grand jury and prosecute. Now, the Bush administration has said, in effect, we will not allow the U.S. District Attorney to obey the law. But it seems to me the U.S. District Attorney for the District of Columbia, his boss is not the president. His boss is the Constitution and the law. It seems to me if the U.S. Attorney refuses to follow the law, then he himself can be tried for contempt of Congress, and we can put him in jail as well.
I agree. I think the problem is what you just said earlier, that the Bush administration is not going to see it that way. And so what my point was to say that if they issue the contempt citations and all that, it's probably not going to go anywhere, because I think the mainstream thought is that the White House will win in that argument. They'll just be able to claim executive privilege. I agree with you. And I think that there's a very significant position that Congress has a role of oversight. They haven't been playing sufficiently, from my perspective, in the past 7 years, and they need to be more vigilant about it. And this is a good place to go.
I want to separate the two issues, because I think that in terms of the role of Congress, that Congress has a power to hold people in contempt, I think that will be upheld by everyone. I mean, even our inspectors seem particularly exercised. He asked Alberto Gonzales, can constitutional government survive if the president can declare anything executive privilege and prevent Congress from holding anyone in contempt? So So I think that is a power that would certainly be upheld.
Right. No, I'm not saying they don't have the power to hold people in contempt. I'm saying that I don't have any confidence that what you were saying about the scenario where the U.S. attorney is going to say, well, I have, no matter what my boss says, I have to do this. I'd like to see it happen. I don't have any think that it will.
I like to think that a person would uphold the law and the Constitution. I don't know the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia very well, but I would hope that he would uphold the law rather than uphold the president. We had Monica Goodling come and testify, and she said, in perhaps some confusion, to Senator Patrick Leahy, and this is a woman with a lot of power for a woman that's about 31, 32 years old, power to choose all the prosecutors across the nation, and she said that she took an oath to protect the president. And Senator Leahy had to remind her that her oath was to protect the Constitution,
right,
not to protect the president, and she had to agree, oops, yes, I guess that is my role. Let me just ask you a general question. Do you see this as a White House that is more apt to protect the president than to protect the Constitution?
Oh, I don't think there's any question about it. And what's really discouraging about that is that when the president takes the oath of office, that's the one single thing he vows to do, is to uphold the laws and to uphold the Constitution. And to see a president who seems to have absolutely contempt for both is just, it's really disheartening, especially for those of us who initially were supportive of him.
And you were initially supportive of the
in
president.
2000, I considered him sort of the lesser of two evils, but yes, I was supportive of him, and it's just been absolutely disheartening.
How about 2004, if I may ask? You don't have to tell.
I did not vote for him. Actually,
by 2004, you were already tired.
By 2004, I said I could not in good
George
conscience vote for George Bush.
Interesting. I want to address something else that really hasn't got as much press as Attorney General Gonzales, and it's on the front page of today's Washington Post. And the article says, Bush aide blocked report, right here.
Right.
And this, now we'd already heard the former U.S. Surgeon General Richard Carmona say a number of things about this administration. He said that he wanted to help the Special Olympics, which doesn't seem a particularly controversial thing. I mean, the Special Olympics, no matter where you are in the partisan divide, you would think that people want to help disabled people and so forth. But apparently, this Special Olympics had been sponsored by the Kennedys in the past, and he was told he can't support something that was also supported by the Kennedys. He also said that 3 times, in fact, he was told that every single speech he gave, 3 times had to mention George Bush in some positive way. He couldn't just give a speech about health care. And then this article in today's report is perhaps the most serious. He was trying to describe a link between poverty and poor health, which I would think is not particularly controversial. I don't think you have to be Surgeon General to understand that in the United States and worldwide, if you're poor, you're more likely to have poor health. But his aides did not want him to publish this report because it didn't look good that there was increasing poverty under George Bush. Do you have a comment on this?
Well, I read it a little differently. I understood that he was a report about global health.
Well, that's right.
And I think that is a little bit different thing because he's not the Surgeon General of Outer Mongolia. He is a Surgeon General of the United States. And there was I mentioned in that report about that one thing that he said was that his thesis was that poor health leads to political instability and therefore we have to address poor health in developing nations. Well, that is a political statement. And I think also it's political when you're talking about giving more money to countries to fight poverty and to fight health, to enhance health care. Those are political positions. And so I would not be quite as hard. The Special Olympics thing I had not heard, and if true, that's really ridiculous because Eunice Kennedy, who founded that, is by no stretch a political figure. And
she's a Kennedy. I'm sure she supports the Democrats, but the Special Olympics are not a political thing.
But the Bushes have made a tremendous effort for some reason that I cannot fathom to reach out to the Kennedys. And one of the first things Bush did when he was first inaugurated was to have the Kennedys come down and watch the Super Bowl in the White House.
Right.
And just recently, his father had Teddy Kennedy at the opening of his library. I mean, I don't understand this wanting to curry favor with the Kennedys, but for some reason they do. So that's a strange twist. But I think that is a political.
But in terms of this report, okay, it seems to me that whether you're arguing that more money should go, that may be a political question. But just to say, as a scientist, that that poverty leads to poor health, that's true in America,
right,
that's true globally, and that some of those effects do come back to America.
But he wasn't even talking, I don't think, necessarily about America. He was talking about migration patterns worldwide. And you have to remember, too, look at Joycelyn Elders in the 90s. I mean, she was when she said things like, we should think about legalizing drugs because it would reduce crime. That's a political statement. That's not about, certainly it's not healthful to have more people taking drugs. And her things about we have to get over this love affair with the fetus because she thought we had too much anti-abortion sentiment. Those are, and Clinton cut her loose.
But isn't there a distinction between making a statement about health and making it politicized? I mean, for example, if Jocelyn Elders had said, here is a study that shows that if you don't, maybe you don't even need a study, maybe it's obvious, but if you don't put people in jail for drug crimes,
right,
there are fewer people in jail for drug crimes. I mean, that's sort of a tautology even, it's basic logic. If Carmona says that if there's greater poverty in the world, there's poorer health in the world, I mean, that is a distinction different from we need to put more money in this. I mean, do you think that the science could have been published without the politics?
Well, I would not say, I don't see it so much as science. I see it more of like what you said, it's basic tautology. Poor people have less access to health care. So it's just, seemed like it was proclaiming the obvious, and I think it also, some of the objection was that it did not, people need to have some context. There needed to be some understanding of how much money is already being spent and how much money is already going there before you just put out a program saying, oh, we've got to spend more and these poor people aren't getting anything. And I can see where that could be interpreted as political.
One of the arguments that the administration made in the article was that Carmona was quite down on tobacco companies worldwide for killing so many people. And tobacco companies, of course, were a big supporter of the Republican Party, a big supporter of George Bush, and they said basically you can't attack tobacco companies in here. Now, I can't recall a Surgeon General that wasn't down on tobacco companies of either party, frankly. I mean, that would seem to be something that it's the Surgeon General's warning on a pack of cigarettes.
Right.
You know, I mean, this is something that every Surgeon General has said back to the 60s. That seemed to me excessive. And the one thing that I found really excessive is this statement, quote, a senior official, after he tried many, many times to put this report forward, said, quote, you don't get it. This will be a political document or it will not be released. Now, that's actually not saying don't put politics in the Surgeon General report. That's saying we must put politics in the Surgeon General report.
Yeah, that actually is not even using politics. I mean, that's more of saying that it has to be propaganda.
Right.
I mean, and you can't really you can't operate very well in the marketplace of ideas if you can't have the ideas out there. If people can't put something out there, and if it's rejected, it's rejected. If it doesn't reflect well on Bush, then it doesn't. I mean, I could argue both sides. Like I said, I can see that's political, but I also think that it's insulting to the American public that somehow they can't. Not supposed to read things like that. They might not make George Bush look good.
But whether it's global warming, whether it's evolution, teaching of evolution, whether it's Plan B, it seems that whenever the Bush administration gets scientific data, they're determined to spin it in the political context. I mean, it even comes down to Homeland Security. One of the first shows I did on the Inside Scoop had to do with a secret department that's almost never talked about called TTIC, the Terrorist Threat Integration Center. And what that is whenever you have data coming in that's supposed to go to the Department of Homeland Security, data like, hey, they're going to attack Boston in 10 days in the subway, the administration doesn't let it go directly to the Department of Homeland Security. They go through this TTIC office, which is not authorized by Congress. It's an executive order, and they try to figure out what political things can be done with it, if anything. And then when they decide, okay, we can't make politics out of it, they submit it to the Homeland Security Department. Mm-hmm. It seems that whether it's Homeland Security, science, abortion politics, world politics, tobacco companies, or Attorney General Gonzalez, this is an administration that cares more about politics than it does about the truth.
I agree, but I think that the Democrats set the gold standard for doing that with the Clinton administration in particular. I mean, if you looked whether it was the environment, I remember Carol Browner, when she was at the EPA, set some rules, like for one that comes to my mind was about diesel fuel. They had to reduce the sulfur in diesel fuel. Well, it was going to be such a marginal improvement for just billions of cost. First of all, every item on a store was going to cost more because of the diesel fuel, everything shipped in on trucks. But it was just because people felt there was no science base to it. She was quoting a couple of these agencies that if you looked it up, and I did, they shared a suite over on Capitol Hill, and they were funded by a grant from the EPA.
I'll tell you what, when we come back, I want to try to figure out whether this is every administration does it, or whether the Bush administration perhaps is doing it in worse in degree and kind than other administrations. Folks, if you want to join in this discussion, you're very welcome to do so. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. We'll be right back after this.
It's time to go pretty quick.
Very quick. My computer is
History has demonstrated that violence only begets greater violence. And injustice only begets greater injustice. This is not the tradition of our great nation. This is not how we want the United States to be known around the world. We have another tradition that we think ought to prevail. One that is more just and more powerful. There is a better way. If we truly want peace and security, then we must work hard for justice. If you're concerned that we've become a nation whose national policies are grounded in beliefs that are centered on a line embedded in BS, then don't miss Escape from Orwellia Nation, a talk show in which concerned regular citizens like you and me, not self-serving media spinmeisters, wade through the barrage of newspeak and doublethink that pollutes public discourse today. Big brother, big business, big media, and the big national parties who collude to keep we the people afraid and in the dark would prefer that you not watch. Show them who's in charge. Tune in to Escape from Orwellia Nation right here on Channel 10.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Melanie Scarborough, columnist for the Washington Examiner, and I are poring over today's Washington Post article to give you accurate information. We've been discussing a report that the Surgeon General, the ex-Surgeon General, I should say, because Richard Carmona and the Bush administration have not gotten along recently, even though he was our Attorney General for 4 years, had a report that said that there are global health problems caused by poverty, and the hunger, disease, and death resulting from poor food and nutrition creates social and political instability, and that instability may spread to other nations as people migrate to survive. He points out that diseases can spread, political instability can spread, tuberculosis, malaria, and so forth. Now, I don't see that, even though it includes political instability, as being a particularly political statement. This seems to me to be factual.
Well, it is factual. It is factual that poverty leads to political instability. But I'm saying that by definition, it just seems to me that if you're talking about political instability, you're making a political statement. I mean, from this excerpt from it where he talks about SARS in Hong Kong and then that shows up immediately in Toronto, none of that is about directly affecting the United States. Obviously, it's a global society. Anything comes here.
Well, I mean, if your point is that SARS can come from Hong Kong to Toronto, obviously your point is it can come to New York or Boston or Atlanta. I mean, Toronto is not so far from us.
But this is a theoretical position paper, essentially, that somebody wrote, and he's trying to put it out there as the Bush administration policy, and I don't think there's anything to fault the Bush administration for saying, well, that's not what we want to say.
See, I don't see this as policy. To me, it's policy what to do about it. That's policy. Mm-hmm. All he's saying is that SARS spreads, and that it spreads worldwide. It doesn't just stay in China. And that's a fact. It made it to Canada. It may well make it here. You can call that theoretical, but to me, if it gets all the way to Toronto, it's not so much theoretical to think it might easily get a little bit further.
Right. But I guess what I'm thinking is that we do have organizations. We have the Centers for Disease Control, the World Health Organization, things that are non-political, non-partisan, that can issue these kind of statements and cannot be affected. This guy is a part of the administration. He works at the sufferance of the president. I just don't think it's politically egregious to say, I want you to say what I want you to say. You're my guy, and if you're not going to, then you're out of here.
I'm wondering, though, because this seems to happen in so many departments. I mean, it seems to happen, the business administration seems to be focusing on, you're our guy, you're our loyal Bushy, rather than you're the best person for the job. I mean, everyone from Mike Brown, who was certainly a loyal Bushy, but was not particularly expert in management of emergency situations. Gonzalez is definitely the president's man, but he seems to be putting his job. Is Gonzalez different from the others? As Attorney General, does he have more responsibility to the law than the president, where the others perhaps have more responsibility to the president than to their departments?
Sure, he's the chief law enforcement officer, and it's stunning to see him sitting there giving clearly if not actually false, just such inartful answers. And at this point, it almost seems that he's more loyal to Bush. I mean, who would sit there and tolerate that? I can't imagine what's going on that man is willing to sit there and take that.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, and we will get to Alberto Gonzales, I'm going to play some of his testimony live today. But what I'm trying to figure out is whether you feel his role is different as Attorney General. I mean, for example, we had Christine Todd Whitman, who's actually a fairly moderate Republican, but she went on air and told everyone after September 11th that it was okay to breathe the air. And that was the political statement that the president wanted to give because they wanted everyone to get back to work in New York. Turns out it wasn't okay. And turns out there are a lot of people got sick. And, you know, I don't know that Christine Todd Whitman, actually I respect her enough to think, I don't think she knew and told a lie to the American people. I'm not so sure I feel the same about Gonzales. I don't think Whitman intentionally lied. But I also think she didn't take the time as the head of the Environmental Protection Agency to check with the scientists to find out the facts before she issued that statement that the president gave her. What, in your view, is the role of a cabinet official when they're torn between the president saying do this and the dictates of their job saying doing something else? Like, for example, Christine Todd Whitman. Should she have told the president, I can't tell the American people it's safe until I find out that it's safe?
Sure. I think that they have a moral obligation that precedes their political obligation. I just lost my train of thought. But I think one of the problems is in any White House, you get the insularity. You get where no one wants to bring the president bad news. And this White House is particularly vulnerable to that because this president doesn't want to hear anything that he doesn't already agree with. And so someone like a Christine Todd Whitman, who does appear to be an honorable person, I think they get caught up in that, where nobody says there aren't any diverging opinions. There's no one to come to them and say, here's what you might not have thought about, here's the part of the puzzle you aren't looking at. And so they go out there and they present it as something that just may be patently false, and then they get caught up in the whole thing. Gonzales, I think, is clearly being deliberately deceptive. But
see, I think Gonzales, I do agree, has gone beyond what Christine Todd Whitman has done.
No, I think she could have easily been relying on aides.
I think she was negligent,
right.
But I don't think she was fraudulent. What we have with Gonzales, it's very interesting, is some really technical legal parsing. And for Republicans who impeached President Clinton over parsing, it all depends on what the definition of is. Right. Everybody laughed. And yet, of course, that was to conceal a private affair, not a very, sort of a sordid thing. But on the other hand, it didn't affect national policy. In this case, you have Gonzales playing interesting legal words with is it the same program, the terror surveillance program? Is it a different program? What exactly was Comey talking about? Have you parsed through his words and figure out what you think is going on?
Well, I think that it's the Clinton legacy, unfortunately. I think it's the idea that if you lie long enough and loudly enough and parse the words, then you can survive politically. I think what he probably will come down to doing is saying, well, I was talking about data mining and they were talking about wiretapping, and there will be some kind of parsing like that. I don't think he's fooling anybody, but I think it's just...
Where will this lead? Is the proper result impeachment of the Attorney General? The Attorney General, like the President, the Vice President, and judges can be impeached. It almost never happens in American history because usually before you impeach a cabinet official, they're fired or they resign. But they certainly, and I can pull out the Constitution and show you, and I think you know this, he certainly can be impeached. Is that the proper next step, or is Chuck Schumer's idea of charging with perjury the correct step, in your view?
Impeachment may really be the only practicable aspect for the reasons we talked about earlier, in that if the U.S. Attorney will not take it upon himself to prosecute, the Justice Department, the Solicitor General clearly is not going to do anything about it.
You don't think he'll appoint a special counsel?
Well, I'm saying that if they refer a contempt charge or they refer a perjury charge to the Justice Department and the Solicitor General, Bush is going to tell him not to prosecute it, so it won't go anywhere there.
Well, again, there are actually several different options, and let's go through them because I don't want to confuse people. There is the Congress can hold inherent contempt and do a trial there. It hasn't been done since 1934, but it is a power recognized by the Supreme Court. That may be one option. Another option is what's been used since the 1930s, refer it to the U.S. District Attorney for the District of Columbia. Never since the 1930s has anyone ever refused to prosecute, but Bush says, no, we're not going to follow this law. That's another option. A third option is impeachment. And a fourth option, and this is the one where that Chuck Schumer has just announced, is to refer it to the Solicitor General, Paul, begins with a C. I'm sorry, I forgot his name. Charlton, something like that. Because he's number 3 and the Attorney General is obviously the one being prosecuted. He can't decide, and number 2 is gone. Paul McNulty, to refer it to him to appoint a special prosecutor, much like Fitzgerald. And I mean, certainly attorney generals have done that in the past. I mean, Janet Reno investigated the Clinton administration by appointing a special prosecutor. Why do you think Solicitor General won't do at least what Janet Reno did, understanding that I'm sure Clinton did not want a prosecutor into his personal affairs, and yet his attorney general did what she felt was the right thing? You don't think the Solicitor General will?
I think Bush will tell him not to. He may do it anyway. I'm not sure that I think, and maybe I'm just missing a piece of the puzzle. In what I've read, I haven't seen really why there would be a cause for it yet, in that there's no evidence of criminal behavior, and I don't think
perjury would be the charge.
Yeah, but I don't think there's any evidence that he's not lying. I mean, they already know that. So it seems to me that they could take other steps, like go straight to impeachment. I don't see really what there would be to investigate when there's just not really any question that he's not telling the truth.
Do you think, I have no doubt that the House would impeach Attorney General Gonzalez tomorrow. Do you think there can be the 2/3 vote in the Senate to convict him? I mean, I think there possibly could be. You would need 17 Republicans. 16, I guess. Depends on, I mean, if Tim Johnson gets back in time or not.
Right.
Do you think we could get 1/3, a quarter of Republicans to vote to convict?
I think you might could. I think you're going to have there is going to be the issue of the Clinton precedent, because I would take issue with your saying, well, that was about a personal matter. It was, but the legal perspective, of course, was the lie, the perjury. And I mean, you had Martha Stewart go to prison for lying about something that she wasn't even charged with. The whole issue was lying. So I think you're going to have enough people, or you could, who would say, we can't really impeach on this because we've already had a president who lied and we didn't impeach on. Well, we did impeach, but we didn't prosecute.
Do you see a distinction between perjury about personal behavior and perjury about running the government? That hiding an affair from your wife and possibly lying about it, and lying about the workings of the federal government. Perhaps they are wiretapping 200 million Americans and lying about it. In fact, I think they probably are, honestly, from my parsing of the language. Do you see a difference between impeaching over lying about an affair with your wife and lying about spying on 200 million Americans?
I certainly think that, of course, the behaviors are just miles apart. There's no comparison on any scale. But what I'm saying is that the law says that if you're talking about impeachment for perjury, then perjury is perjury. You lied to a government official. You lied about this. You lied in a setting, an official setting. You lied. You took the oath. That I'm saying is, I don't think the law can make that distinction. The law can't say, well, this is a worse crime, and therefore we're not going to prosecute. I think it can make the personal distinction myself, but I think the law is very clear that perjury is perjury.
Actually, I disagree. I think the law can make a distinction. As a former trial lawyer, we learned long ago, if you ask a woman her age on the stand and she says she's 55 when she's really 65, the reason that it's not, even though it's a lie under oath, it is not perjury because it has to be material. It has to be relevant to the thing at hand. I think there's an argument that can be made, and I think a decent argument, that whatever Bill Clinton did with Monica Lewinsky, it wasn't related to the Paula Jones case, and it wasn't material. You could argue it was material, but it seems to me that when you're talking about not personal acts, but government acts, things that affect Americans' lives, hiding secretive policy, that's the kind of thing from which, frankly, impeachment was designed. It is a high crime misdemeanor.
Definitely.
It's for official acts, not private acts, and it's, I think, very strong grounds to impeach him. I know we've got Andrew from Alexandria on the phone. I assure you, Andrew, we will get to your question, but you're going to have to wait until after the break. Folks, if you want to join Andrew and make your comment on what everything Melanie or I am saying, just give us a call, 888-488-MARK. We'll be right back after this.
This is Mommy's bed. Me and Jenny were jumping on it. Mommy's gun fell on the floor. I was a cowboy. Bang, 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 bang. I said, Jenny, wake up, it's just pretend. But she wouldn't wake up. If you give me a fish.
If you give someone a fish,
you feed them for a day.
Teach someone to fish.
You feed them for a lifetime.
Give me a fish, and you'll feed me for a day. Teach me to fish, and you'll feed me for a lifetime.
Through Volunteers of America, you can help change lives in your community.
mister studied algebra in school and got a better job than I could. You take the last cup.
Oh, no, Mr. Stuck in an entry-level job because you only learned basic math. I don't have a boss riding my butt like you do, so you take it so you can get back to your desk.
You know, I probably should, but maybe Miss AP Calculus with the $200 haircut in the big office upstairs would like a cup.
Oh, no, Mr. What was your name again? Never mind, it doesn't matter. I'm too busy doing important things to care. I just came down for some sweet and start.
You know, if my limited math abilities weren't keeping me from getting a better job, I'd quit this afternoon.
I don't blame you. But thank goodness you're stuck here because we really need someone to make the coffee.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. We are discussing all the president's men and women. How many of them will lie for him? How many of them put their loyalty to the president above their job? Primarily talking about Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, but also Surgeon General Richard Carmona, a former EPA examiner Elizabeth Todd Whitman, and really all the people Christine Todd Whitman, I don't know why I said Elizabeth. Christine Todd Whitman. But really, whether or not the people in our government are showing more loyalty to their government, to the president, or to the American people. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. Andrew from Alexandria, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Yes, I just want to make a quick comment that I think the interesting thing about this is it's not necessarily what's going on with Gonzales, obviously, but it's the whole administration. And there's a 20-year program that's going on for years with an agenda. What we don't have from the Democrats is an agenda to change anything. When Pelosi's got the nerve to say that she's going to take impeachment of Bush off the table and not be involved in it, the whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, we understand that the president's lied about a variety of things that anywhere else in the world would have been overthrown, and in this country, they take that off. They're going to worry about people like Scooter Libby and Gonzales. It's just a total joke, and yet there's nobody on the other side that has any concern. This whole team has had an agenda from the beginning. This is not a new thing. This is something that was planned all along to do what they wanted to do, and they've done everything they want to do and control it. And every time they have an opportunity, you know, the Democrats have done anything with it. And my feeling with it is that this is so limited to worry about the peripheral. George Bush, who's your president of the United States, is a total criminal. And how he sits in that White House.
Hang on the phone. I'm going to get back to you. Melanie, respond to Andrew.
He has a valid point. It's like you said, and you made a good point about the material lies that that was silly for Pelosi to say that about taking impeachment off the table. I think what she wanted to do was ingratiate herself politically and to try to say, well, we're not going to play tit for tat just because you impeached Clinton, we're not going to impeach Bush. But, you know, like he said, things that would never be tolerated. We wouldn't even conceive of a president behaving this way that this one has.
So you think you would support the impeachment of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney?
I'm not going to sit here tonight and say that I would impeach. I'm not going to make that put myself
there.
Right, but I think you could go through with the behavior of the contempt for the Constitution, the way that the things that the contempt for the idea of just human rights, just basic privacy, basic civil liberties, the way they absolutely have no regard for them.
Let me suggest to you and also suggest to Andrew that impeachment really isn't off the table. I think that in 2006, we didn't have enough evidence to impeach at that time. Certainly, I mean, I thought there was enough, frankly, but I knew that it wasn't enough for that the American people wanted. I mean, I don't think you impeach a president if 51% of the American people want to impeach the president. I think it's a very extreme thing, and you do when 75% perhaps want to impeach him. Right now, we have Bush with a 26% approval rating. 74% disapprove does not mean 74% want to impeach. I don't think impeachment really is off the table. What I think Nancy Pelosi was doing is saying it's off the table for now. I mean, off the table doesn't mean we won't do it. To me, it just means it's not right front and center.
Mark.
But I think, and I'll get to you in a second, Andrew, I promise.
Sure.
I think what they're doing is going step by step. And Andrew calls it peripheral, and to some extent it is, and I agree with him. But what they're doing is they're going after Gonzales, if you will, the weakest link. They're going to show through him, I think, that Karl Rove was the one involved in virtually all decisions of this administration. In fact, they've already issued a subpoena to Karl Rove. I think Schumer and Leahy and Conyers are working very hard to get these facts before the American people to build up the kind of political support that you need before you impeach the president. And that's what I'm going to throw back at you, Andrew. It seems to me the Democrats, while not going front and center for impeachment, are building up all the evidence, showing it to the American people. You're convinced, but the majority of American people are not yet convinced. And through Gonzales and through Karl Rove, we'll put it front and center so that 6 months from now, maybe impeachment could be on the table. What do you think?
Well, my concern is that, if you turn the tables, if this was a Democrat president with these approval ratings, with these issues on the board, and the Republicans were out of power and didn't have the president, you are telling me that they would be sitting and waiting for this opportunity?
No, I'm not telling you that.
They would nailed him for every opportunity, not just for political gain, but this is a moral issue. This is an ethical issue that your children are living through, seeing what goes on, understand the day that people are dying every day in Iraq over something that nobody can understand, that nobody has any reason for, that's not controlling the terror. Terrorism is worse than ever before, just like they predicted before they went to Iraq. There is no excuse, there's no joke, and that's one issue.
I agree with you, Andrew. I do want to make a distinction between the war in Iraq, which I find extremely reprehensible, and the lies that got us there, which I find extremely reprehensible, and pure lawlessness. I just think as a lawyer, it's not a high crime or misdemeanor to get us into an idiotic war, as much as I agree with you that it's idiotic. I do think it is against the law to wiretap the American people without a warrant, to use political decisions perhaps to keep blacks from voting, which is what I think the U.S. prosecutor scandal is all about. And I just want to make a distinction. I think some people on the left conflate all the awfulness of the Bush presidency together. And I just think when we talk about impeachment, we need to be very clear legalistically. To me, bad policy is not a reason for impeachment. And I think Iraq was bad policy, whereas I think violating the law, putting people in jail without trial, for example, that's a clear violation of the Sixth Amendment. Or torturing people, that's a clear violation of the Eighth Amendment. Violating Geneva Conventions, those kinds of things I think are impeachable offenses. The war in Iraq, as much as I detest it, I think isn't. I'm going to give Melanie a chance.
I agree. That's a good point. But I think it's stunning if you were to go back and look at the things that Richard Nixon was in trouble for in 1974, misusing agencies of the federal government, the FBI, the IRS, and look at what George Bush has done with them. It's just...
well, now, how would you compare them?
I think that George Bush has done things that Richard Nixon would have never thought about doing.
See, I think so too. I mean, to me, when you look at Watergate, what was Watergate? It was he busted into one Democratic office, and frankly, I don't know that Nixon approved it beforehand. We know he covered it up afterwards, but I don't know that the evidence is clear that he approved it before, and I don't think history has determined that. He may not have, and I'm willing to actually give even Richard Nixon the benefit of the doubt, assuming he didn't. So some of his political operatives broke into a building, he helped cover it up. In this case, you have the president ordering, not just covering up, torture, putting people in jail without trial. What I think Gonzales is covering up right now, when he talks about other intelligence activities, is the data mining you're talking about. And data mining sounds very calm, but what is data mining? It is spying on all of us. It is, in other words, finding out every credit card purchase we've made, every phone call we've made, and not just terrorists. I mean, we know from the phone calls alone, they have 250 million Americans' phone bills. If 250 million Americans are terrorists, our phone bills are our least concern.
No, and people are hopelessly naive if they believe that all of this stuff, what were they calling it, the Total Information Awareness Network or whatever. And Congress said, no, you can't do it when the Pentagon was doing it. Well, what they're not thinking about is that the Secret Service is exempt from the Privacy Act, which means the Secret Service can collect any record they want, they can share it with any agency they want. They have a virtually unlimited budget. Of course, 10 years ago, they were trying to get everybody's picture off the driver's license and compile a photographic record of every American, which they no doubt have done by now. There's just no telling what's being done. And I'm sure, and of course, this administration, they just call everything classified. If you called over to the White House and asked which secretary sharpens the pencils, they would tell you that's classified.
Sure, they would.
And so you can't win because you can't get the information that you need.
So you think that the Democrats in Congress, you would actually agree that they're playing it right. They're getting all the information, they're demanding it. You don't think they've gone too far?
No, I don't. I think they have a role for oversight that they didn't handle strongly enough, right, when it was Republican Congress. One of the reasons we have a Democratic Congress, the Republicans just gave him a free pass, and they just rubber stamped everything he did and let him, and it just got us in a terrible position.
Andrew, you want the last word? Go ahead. Are you still there, Andrew? Okay, Andrew's gone. Folks, if you want to call in and join this discussion, it's easy to do. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK. Give us a call and let us know what you think. There are so many ways in which this administration is putting their policy ahead of science. One that came up recently was Plan B. Now, I fully understand the whole pro-life, pro-choice debate. The administration could have said, we're not going to allow Plan B because we believe that It could kill an incipient embryo, and we think that's wrong politically, and therefore we won't allow it. That's not what they did. They made all these scientific arguments that scientists say just aren't true, that it's basically safe. Just like any pill, there are complications that can be put on there, but it's no more unsafe than anything else that's over the counter. My question is, when this kind of thing happens, when people hide politics and pretend it's science, doesn't it lead the American people just not to trust anything the government's saying?
It probably does. I go back to my point that I think it was done just as badly, even worse, under the Clinton administration. You had partial birth abortion, where you could not find a doctor who could explain how that procedure could possibly protect the health of a mother. It never saves the mother to kill the baby. And so Clinton was going around, he surrounded himself at one point when he vetoed it with 11 women that all had the procedure and swore it was necessary, and some doctor went around and interviewed them and said it wasn't necessary in any case. I mean, those kind of things.
Well, no, that's not true. We did a show on partial birth abortion, and there are definite cases where it does protect the health of the mother. There are cases where the mother can't have a baby again unless she has a partial birth abortion.
Not as partial birth abortion is defined, where the baby is mostly delivered and you're just sucking out the. If you're talking about just late trimester abortions, yeah, that's a different thing.
No, I'm talking about specifically, for example, in the opinion itself, and I read the entire opinion and the dissent. It says that if basically what the law requires is instead of collapsing the skull. I mean, it's a gruesome procedure as you discuss it, and pulling out the baby in whole. It requires you cut up the baby in the fetus, the embryo, whatever you want to call it, inside the womb, and that leaves all kinds of excess bones and everything out there that can cut and damage the mother's uterus. I mean, it's actually far less safe for the woman. Now, you could say it probably won't kill her, but it can cause long-term health complications.
But that's standard issue abortion, what you're describing. That's how they performed.
No, but you don't have to. If you do the DNX procedure, the one that was outlawed, the baby's pulled whole. You don't have to cut up the baby inside.
But you can't do that until a certain term in the pregnancy where the baby is fully formed.
Well, of course. So, we're only talking about late-term abortions. I mean, this procedure, no, obviously, early procedures, there's just a vacuum and there's none of this.
But if the mother's health were at stake, urgency would dictate. You have to get the baby out as quickly as possible. You do an emergency C-section.
And the quickest way to do it?
No, you can do a C-section within 30 seconds. You wouldn't do this thing where you do all this and you put the mother into labor and pull out the baby.
There are many doctors that think, in some cases, that this is the safest way. I mean, a C-section involves dramatic surgery. It's a very violent procedure. It's more violent to the mother than the DNX procedure.
I have never read that. You may have data that I have not seen, but I've never read it.
I'll tell you where to read it. Read the dissent to that opinion.
Okay.
And that's now, you can disagree with it. Obviously, the majority did.
Well, and go back to the Surgeon General. Maybe this politicizing, but he said at the time that there's no case that would ever be necessary medically. So,
look, I know there's some scientists that say that. But I also know there are many scientists, including the AMA, by the way, says that sometimes it's necessary. I think it's the American College of Obstetricians says it's sometimes necessary. I just think at the end of the day that when you have a disagreement about this, and when it's clearly there's politics involved. I mean, if there were disagreements among cancer treatments, scientists would get together and there might well be a disagreement about what's the proper treatment or all, but no one's arguing that one form of treatment, another form is immoral. When you throw in the political basis, you have people who are not necessarily looking for science to determine these answers.
But even when you have science, you still can't divorce that from politics. And you can look back at AIDS spending in the 1990s when you had 1.6 billion. You had half as much money being spent on AIDS as was being spent on cancer research, which was killing 500,000 people. Heart disease was killing 750,000, getting 800 million, and AIDS was killing maybe 30,000 a year. So because it was a vehement political lobby aided by a sympathetic media, you had a lot, all this money went that the science wouldn't dictate.
I would argue the science did support it, and the reason is because AIDS was a relatively new disease, and with new diseases, sometimes you can find cures very quickly. I don't think anyone felt that we could find a cure for cancer or heart disease in 5-10 years, and yet AIDS today is largely a curable disease, 90%. It's our people living with AIDS. In the United States, I understand around the world it's a much more dangerous problem because these drugs are expensive, but live with AIDS, don't die with AIDS. So actually, it turns out in hindsight, I think the money was worthwhile.
But that's making an argument for politicizing the money, though, because
I'm just saying the science supported it.
Okay.
I think the science supported it. If you want to call in and join us, you can. The number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. We'll be right back after this.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
My name is David Bell. I am a resident of Virginia's 11th Congressional District, and I ask Representative Tom Davis to initiate or support investigations into violations of the law by President Bush and his administration.
Tom Davis, my name is Jean Reynolds, and I'm one of your constituents. I want you to join immediately with other members of Congress to begin an investigation of the criminal acts that George Bush has committed.
I'm Nick Spengler of Ashland, Virginia, and I would like our troops to come home and Bush to get out of office.
My name is Nancy Maynard. I live in the 11th Congressional District, and this message is for Tom Davis. I'm asking you to please investigate for impeachment.
My name is Bruce Smith. I live in the 11th Congressional District in Woodbridge, Virginia. I want Congressman Davis to support the investigation of President Bush and Vice President Cheney and those that foisted this war on us.
Hello, Congressman Davis. I'm Carrie Plonson from the 11th Congressional District, and I'd like you to take immediate action to investigate George Bush and his offenses in leading this country into a war that's unwarranted and there is no solution for.
We have to impeach. I am just appalled that we would not, quote, waste our time with impeachment. The message to the world has to be that Bush and Cheney are guilty of international war crimes about which we can't do anything. We can do a lot about the crimes committed within the U.S. Constitution.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, former congressional attorney Mark Levine. My guest is Melanie Scarborough, columnist for the Washington Examiner. We're having a freewheeling discussion on any number of issues. You're welcome to join in. This is live. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK. And we didn't really mean to go there, but now that we're here, we were talking about AIDS funding and the difference between that and cancer. And I was saying that AIDS is very different in that AIDS, there was real belief that there might actually be a vaccine or a cure in a few years. And in effect, we're very much approaching that day, and you actually agree with me that cancer is, as you put it, nature's trump card.
Yeah, if you live long enough, you will develop cancer. Men will develop prostate cancer. Women will develop breast cancer. That just seems to be the way that it works. People live long enough. But what I'm saying is that your point actually makes mine, I think, because what you're saying is that the political forces worked to get the money for AIDS, then made it where there were treatments found. But it was because of the political force that the money was spent. It wasn't because of science. I mean, it wasn't because it was allocated saying, all right, there are this many victims of this disease and this many victims of this disease, where it would have been perhaps more fair in some people's lives.
Well, I think that if any cure, any disease, you look at, yes, the number of victims, but you also look at the possibility of a cure. I mean, if the possibility of a cure is 90% and you only have 1,000 victims, you'd probably want to put money in it. If the possibility of a cure is 1% and you have 100,000 victims, I mean, you have to look at both, not just the number of victims.
True. I think it's also fair to factor in that AIDS is, to a certain degree, preventable, whereas cancer is not. I mean, and especially as it began to progress.
Well, lung cancer is preventable, but we still have these tobacco companies.
But as it became less of homosexual males and more of IV drug abusers, then you could certainly say, okay, well, then this is a disease almost of choice, and so, does it really make sense to continue putting that kind of money into it?
Except that today, as you know, but particularly in Africa, this is a heterosexual disease. It's mostly spread by sexual contact, and it occurs among tens of millions of people. So, I think the IV drug users is a very small percentage.
But in our country,
even in our country, it's a very small percentage.
But the percentages changed markedly in the 1980s. They went from being where it was.
It couldn't have been over 10%, I don't think. You think it was?
I think it was. I don't.
All right,
we don't have
those figures.
I think it became.
Let me go to Leonard from Northern Virginia. Leonard, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Mark.
Yes.
You're the greatest person that helps old timers. I've had a problem with the government, National Institute of Health, and I served in the Navy, 4,600 sailors, 175 Marines, 120 flyboys, all aboard an aircraft carrier, and we knew one thing in life, prevention. People don't know what it was in World War II, prevention. Disease is sometimes something that's been built into us, and we have to figure out some way to find a cure. Well, my experience after 13 visits with maybe thousands of doctors up at NIH, they says, well, it's like everything else. We don't have a procedure to correct what you would say a heart disease. And this was back a while.
Well, Leonard, let me address some of the issues, because I think there are many issues wrapped up in your question. One is, and we haven't brought it up yet, stem cell research, and specifically embryonic stem cell research, which many feel has the best opportunity to cure a disease like Alzheimer's. That to me is wrapped up in this question, as well as issue of just general veterans health care, which I think is deplorable considering what our veterans give to our country. So let me just ask you on both those issues, your views.
I think the embryos that are going to be destroyed anyway, I don't understand the logic behind saying that there has to be a ban on that. I just don't follow that.
As far as I know, no one is arguing, that you create embryos for this purpose. They're only talking about using the ones
I think
that would be destroyed anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a hysterical extrapolation that some people have made to try to counter it, but I just can't imagine that would happen. And
so you have no problem with federal funding for embryonic stem cell research based on embryos that would be destroyed otherwise?
Based on what I know, I don't.
Okay, and what about veterans' health care in general?
I think that veterans deserve the best health care that's available that we can possibly give them, and I think we fail them. And if you look at the Walter Reed, and they're just not getting what they need to get.
Leonard, do you feel you're not getting sufficient health care?
Well, personal life, my wife was suffering for 25 years with a heart condition. NIH again, this is government.
National Institute of Health.
Yep. And one of the Congressman Broyhill at the time simply says to the director of NIH, let me see your program and your budget. Boy, that shook him up. They found out that my wife died from a diseased kidney that she was born with, and she died at 43 years of age. And a London doctor says in the United States, they do not have what they would say a centralized procedure as to conquering the disease. Now, you know darn well if you have a kidney that is not functioning, all that pus is going into your body, whether it's stuff that you get from, I'm not talking about sex now because they bring up the same thing. Oh, well, she was pregnant and that's it. I keep saying, well, hey, you got medical programs and in those days they had the equipment, but they didn't have the doctors.
Let me tell you, first of all, I'm very, very sorry for your loss, and that sounds horrific. Let me ask Melanie the more general question about health care in the United States, and not just for veterans. Michael Moore's movie, I think, will win some awards as a document. Did you see Sicko, by the way?
I didn't. I saw the other one, but I haven't seen this one.
You need to see this film.
I will.
Because whether you agree or not with Michael Moore, it raises some profound issues about universal health care, and obviously he feels it's necessary for the United States. But one of the things I found in this movie that so impressed me was the first half is basically complaining about treatment in the United States. Leonard's story could be one of them. Another story would be a man who was using a buzzsaw, cut off 2 of his fingers, and could only afford to sew one back on. He couldn't afford to sew the other back on, so he lost that finger. And lots of stories like that. There are some gruesome stories. I remember thinking halfway through the film, okay, Michael Moore, you're doing a film and you're just complaining about what's going on in the United States, but you're not really offering any solutions, you're just talking about the problem. But then, what do you know? He talked about England, he talked about France, he talked about Canada, he even talked about Cuba. I'm not sure about the Cuba part, but at least with England, France, and Canada, you have people that are pretty happy with the way their health care is. And they go in, they don't pay anything. They do pay higher taxes. I mean, absolutely, they do. But every single citizen of those nations, and even non-citizens, get basic health care treatment, including preventive care, which Leonard talks about. What's your position on that?
They get basic health care treatment. What they don't get are the things that we're spoiled to in this country, the transplants, the Cadillac standard of care that the people will have to cross the borders and come here to get because they
But why can't we get both? Why can't we provide through tax money the basic standard for everyone and still allow rich people who want to pay extra for the Cadillac procedures? I'm not saying ban those procedures.
But you'd have to wait so long to get in. Then you start having rationing. You start having to have somebody's going to get in line, and when are you going to get it? You're not going to live that long. And I'm very leery of that whole socialized medicine thing. I think that it's these glowing reports, for every glowing report that you read about how it's worked in some country, you read 10 horror stories about how somebody says they couldn't get treated. I have a friend who just came back from London and was terribly sick over there, and she couldn't get so much as cough syrup because it's a socialized medicine. If you're not the citizen that has your little card, you can't get into a doctor. And here, you can be from any country in the world and walk into an emergency room and get treated. Best medical care in the world.
Yeah, but see, that's part of the problem.
It is part of the problem.
Emergency care is very expensive. And, I'm not so sure the government should fund cough syrup. I think that's something that's cheap enough that people can buy cough syrup.
No, I'm saying she couldn't get in to see a doctor because not being a citizen she couldn't get any treatment over there because they have the nationalized medicine and she couldn't get in to see
Yeah, but
anyone.
what you're really saying is that as a non-citizen, she wasn't getting the same treatment a citizen is, which I don't know. Michael Moore's movie showed non-citizens getting that treatment, but whether or not that's true, that's a very different case. I mean, Americans don't want to give non-citizens here the treatment that citizens get, but generally, for every anecdote, and you can name 10 and I can name 10, all you have to do is look at polls, and those aren't anecdotes. The great majority of people in England, France, and Canada are satisfied with their system. Even England has a new government, and Canada has a new conservative government, and they're talking about many things. The French have a new, more conservative government. None of them are talking about getting rid of universal health care. The people there like it.
I think we're already going to be in a position where ours is going to be unsustainable. I mean, by 2030, with the aging population, you just look at Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, it's going to be $40% of the federal budget. By, it could be 75% of the federal budget. I said that wrong. By like 2075. I mean, it's just going to be where it's totally unsustainable. And so I can't imagine that you're going to say, not only are the elderly people going to be receiving all of this, but then you're going to add into the mix every single person the government is going to pay for. I just can't see how the numbers could ever crunch out.
I don't understand why we, the richest country on earth, can't do what Canada, England, and France can do. I think we can. I think, first of all, if you get rid of the middleman, and yes, I'm sorry for all those people who work in all those insurance companies and HMOs, but if we get rid of all those people, we can save money. I think one of the reasons why healthcare is so expensive is because we have this middleman they don't have in all these countries.
Definitely why it's expensive. Anytime you have a third-party payer, things cost more.
So won't we save money then with universal health care?
No, because when the system before 1965, when you essentially paid for your own bills, you went to the hospital, you had a baby, it cost you $200 because the doctor sent you the bill, you wrote the check. When you start bringing in things like Medicare and Medicaid and where we now, you go in a hospital, you pay for yourself and you pay for 3 other people. Or the insurance company, nobody cares how much it costs because they can charge the insurance company $7 for Q-tip. The insurance company pays
again, universal health care where you have a single bill, a single way to go. Why can't we learn from Canada, England, and France?
It would be the same system. It would still be billing the government for something.
Right,
So it's
but it works in Canada. That's my point. If it works in Canada, why can't it work in the United States?
I'm not convinced it works in Canada. I'm sure you have evidence, but I have not seen. I've seen horror stories about it, and
anyone can find horror stories.
I know,
but the majority of Canadians are very happy with it, and I think we can still allow the Cadillac standard. I don't think there'll be rationing because doctors will want to be paid extra for the fancy Cadillac stuff. I'd like to know, though, that every American is taken care of with basic health care, and I think we would save money not just by cutting out the middleman, but also by cutting out emergency care with more preventative care. It's cheaper to prevent disease than to treat a very serious disease. I'm afraid that's going to have to be it. Melanie Scarborough, thank you very much for coming here on The Inside Scoop. Folks, if you want to learn more about The Inside Scoop, please go to my website, radioinsidescoop.com. We deal with a host of every issue, anything really that news the government does not want you to know. And you can comment on the blog at radioinsidescoop.com. This is Mark Levine, signing off.